I speak to you in the name of one God, holy and undivided Trinity. I'm guessing that, like me, you have had the experience of waking up in the middle of the night, mind racing, unable to get back to sleep, trying to figure out what it was that woke you up, but knowing that whatever it was, you're up now, mind chasing squirrel after squirrel, feeling something from uneasy to flat out scared, but not sure exactly why. And then it happens again. As soon as morning comes, the fear and anxiety, the monkey mind go away. But you know it's waiting there on the fringes, waiting to strike in the wee hours of the night. Amazed at the power of darkness to make okay things seem bad and bad things terrifying. Hearing voices in the night that rarely have anything good to say to us. I know for me, the voices lure my mind into getting stuck on all the mistakes I have made and what God might think of them, on the worsening climate crisis, on the sorry state of our nation, on the many wars raging across this beautiful, fragile planet. And I have to try to distract myself from that carousel of anxiety, though I'm not sure what I'm most anxious about, that I will hear a voice in the darkness, or that I will hear nothing but silence. Which brings me to 12-year-old Samuel wrestling with voices he heard while sleeping in the temple, right next to the Ark of the Covenant. Samuel, you may remember, was the son of Hannah, a miracle child born when she was far older than childbearing age, a child she had longed for and prayed for years, a child she had promised to God. If she was ever blessed enough to have a child, she promised God, give the child to God. And so when Samuel was just a year old, she took him to old Eli, the priest responsible for opening the shrine of the temple in the morning and closing it up at night, for keeping the lamp of God filled with oil, and for cleaning up after sacrifices were offered at the altar. That was a particularly nasty job. Sacrifices occurred all day long, and the altar was awash with blood. It splattered up the walls and onto the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. So Eli lived, and Samuel lived among the smell of blood and of incense and of the pot where the sacrificial meat was boiling, a portion of it dedicated to Eli the priest. And there was the sight and sound of an endless stream of people chattering and animals sometimes protesting the moment of slaughter. And whatever Samuel's part was in all of this, it was surely nasty. But he did get to live by the throne of Yahweh, formed of the Ark of the Covenant and containing relics of all the great things Yahweh had done for Israel. It held a container of manna, Aaron's rod, and the tablets with the 10 Commandments, the covenant inscribed on them. I imagine sleeping so close to all that glory and power might have made for sleepless nights. But Samuel seemed to be used to it, falling asleep near the wings making up the throne, the smell of incense and cooked meat in the air. But he knew not to sleep too soundly in case old Eli needed him in the night. And as the story goes, one night, Samuel did, in fact, hear a voice call out to him, a voice he was sure was Eli's. So he ran into Eli's room and said, "Here I am." Now, the first time, Eli might have thought Samuel was just hearing things. The second time, I'm guessing Eli started to have his suspicions, but despite how astounding it sounds given where Samuel lived and what he did, the story tells us Samuel did not figure it out because he did not yet know the Lord. Which almost makes you wonder if being in the temple, being in a church, isn't all there is to knowing God. Anyway, by the third time, Eli knows that it is God who is speaking. So he tells Samuel to respond with, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And when you think about it, saying that probably took far more courage than sacking out next to the ark. The good news for Samuel is that he listened to God. The bad news for Eli is that Samuel listened to God. And though Samuel at first did not want to tell Eli what he had heard, and though Eli probed and checked to make sure it was God's voice Samuel had heard, when pressed, Samuel told Eli the whole sorry saga, how Eli's faithless and feckless sons, despite being told not to, had been pilfering sacrificial meat from the altar, and how God had had enough, and the hammer was about to fall. Honestly, if that is what happens when you pay attention to voices in the night, I'd rather be tallying up my mistakes and relitigating conversations in my head all night long. I mean, for all our talk about wanting to hear a word from God, do we really? Is it worse to hear it or not to hear it? Worse to pass out with fear at the sound of the living God, or to live oblivious to it, distracted by the 1,000 picky little voices that stop us from hearing? I wonder if that, in fact, is what makes me focus on those picky little voices. Perhaps it's all to avoid responding to the voice in the night, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." It's born of the fear that I will hear something or that I won't. But if you look at all the biblical evidence, it all points to hearing something eventually. Since the word God spoke to bring the world into being, to the word given to Abraham and Sarah, to the word made flesh, God has been speaking to us, and God still speaks. But God does not force us to hear. All you need to do is look at Samuel. It wasn't until he told God he was ready to hear that God really let loose with what was on the holy heart and mind. It's probably good to remember that it took the wisdom of a fellow traveler, Eli, to help Samuel understand what was happening to him and who was speaking. It's also probably good to remember that once Samuel had heard, there was no going back. Hearing a word from God changed his life forever. So this seems to me like a definite case of be careful what you pray for if what you are seeking is an invitation from God to listen. But the fact is, we have indeed been issued such an invitation. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews wrote, "See that you do not refuse to hear the voice that speaks." And the God's honest truth is that this voice is always speaking to us, not just in the middle of the night, but in broad daylight too, and not just using words, but using our lives. Ever since God spoke to us through and in Jesus, God's word has come to us in our persons, in our bodies, in the events of our lives. We just need to pay attention and learn how to listen, to hear what all of that is telling us. How can we find out? What is God trying to say to us? I have a hunch that other than the crucial, essential message that you are deeply loved, the message is different for each of us, as different as our lives. I also have a hunch that the beginning of hearing is the same for all. Our first step, when we are willing to gather all the courage we can muster, open our mouths and say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." May it be so.